Hello, everybody. This is Jake Stanier, host of the Jake and Gino podcast with my co-host, the multifamily mentor, the coach, the chef, the father, six, the best-selling author, the G-Daddy, Gino Barber. Gino, how's it going?
Jake, this is going to be a very sweet and beautiful podcast for me because I'm going to get your inner emotions today. You almost stood me up today. You've never been late to a podcast in 5 years. And of all the ones where I'm going to tap your inner emotions and your inner feelings, you almost stick me up and you almost leave me for an engineer, bro. That's unheard of for Stenziano.
I think I'm about to leave because you're scaring the shit out of me right now.
Let's go, brother. I'm ready for you.
I don't know what's going on with Gino today. But today's guest helps people be a force for change. He is the author of 7 books, which between them have sold over 1 million copies. His new book, How to Begin, helps people be more ambitious for themselves and for the world. So without further ado, Michael Bungay Stanier, welcome to the show.
So good to be here. Thanks for having me.
I hope it's good for me to be here. I'm a little scared today, but we want to get into you. It's about you today. So let's hear a little bit about your story and how you got started in business.
Well, I got started in business because I finally got fired one too many times and found myself, unhirable, and finally went, okay, I think being an entrepreneur is the only option now left available to me. But if you rewind from that, I'm Australian, grew up in Australia, went to high school in my hometown, which is Canberra, went to university there as well, and then had the good luck to win a Rhodes Scholarship that took me from the Australian National University to study at Oxford. And I say good luck because it did 2 things. It stopped me becoming a lawyer because I had just done a law degree and it hadn't gone well. I mean, I literally finished law school being sued by one of my law school professors for defamation. So it was like, I was getting the vibe that this was not the path for me. And when I arrived at Oxford, I met my wife. This is almost 30 years ago this year. And so found true love as well as starting off my career in the UK. So, I did a master's degree at Oxford. And so it meant I now spent 8 years at university, which was probably at least 2 years too long. So I was quite excited to get out and get a real job. And I found my way into a new product development company. This is kind of in the early mid-90s, I guess, before innovation became a real buzzword. And what this company did is it went to big organizations and said, we'll help you invent the products and the services that you want to launch out into the world. What was really good about this company is they were all about don't do business as usual. The 2 founders had come from Unilever and they were used to the big machinery of a big company. And they're like, look, Michael, be weird. We like you. You got long hair, you got piercings, you make your own clothes, you're odd. That's kind of the vibe that we're going for. So that was a great job until I realized that none of the stuff that we were inventing was actually making it out into the market. I was like, what happened? We have these good ideas and then they go into a big company and they die somewhere. So that got me interested in how change happens in organizations. I joined a change management consultancy, moved from London to Boston, worked in Boston for 3 years, had enough of it all, decided to leave, moved to Toronto, but my flight from Boston to Toronto was on 9/11. So that meant the job I had lined up went away. And that's what launched my company, Box of Crayons, which turned into a training company to help organizations move from advice-driven to curiosity-led. So it puts the power of curiosity at the heart of building a successful culture, building a successful team, and having more impact in the work that you do.
Love that, Michael. I'm holding the book up for all the people watching on YouTube. We're going to be discussing the coaching habit. Say less, ask more, and change the way you lead forever. It's an amazing book. We're going to go through the 7 questions on here. My very first question, though, for you is, what is the difference between coaching for performance and coaching for development?
Yeah, it's a good place to start because those terms sometimes get bandied around and they're a bit jargony. They're like, what's the difference? Aren't they? They're kind of the same. Coaching for performance is when you've got to focus on just the outcome, on getting things done. Coaching for development is when you're trying to grow the person as well. And the truth is, most of the time we talk about coaching, we're often talking about, can we sort out this problem? Can we get this thing fixed? I mean, I think of the metaphor as a fire. When you're looking at the fire and you're like, how do we build the fire up? Or how do we put the fire out? Or how do we look after the fire and grow it or whatever in a certain way? And there's obviously that needs to be done. The fire needs to be looked after. But coaching for development is when you're helping the person who's actually responsible for the fire do a better job at putting it out or building it up or whatever needs to be done around that. And so it's a shift from my job is just to solve the problem to my job is to grow the people who can then solve the problem. And coaching for development often just gets kind of put aside as a, look, we'll have our annual performance conversation about how you're doing, and we'll call that coaching for development. And the rest of the time it's go, 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 get stuff done. Whereas my stand on it would be to say, look, if you are able to make coaching for development more of an everyday way of working with people, you're constantly committed to growing your people. And when you grow your people, you grow their capacity and their confidence and their competence, which means actually as a unit, as a team, or as a business, you get to work less hard, but actually have more impact and get more done.
Michael, isn't that a challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs, especially the type A who want to do it all, want to get all the accolades and want to say that I'm here. I don't want to develop that person because that person is going to get smarter than me or he's going to get all the credit. What do you say to those types of entrepreneurs out there that don't, whatever you're speaking? By the way, you're preaching to the choir. I've been trying to adopt this for the last couple of years. How do you get that person on board to say, this is the way you really should do it? You should do it for performance. Absolutely. But how do you get them on board and say the development way is the way to go to grow your company?
Well, let me ask you, Gino, because you're asking this question. You say you're converted. You've been doing it for the last 2 years. What's the shift for you? What's different?
Well, I used to be a mom and pop operator, and I got sick of doing everything. I got sick of doing my own podcast bookings. I got sick of doing all this other stuff. And I finally realized that my value, my worth is more. Now, it took a couple of years to come to that realization because it wasn't worth more. But once I decided, hey, I should be on these podcasts more often. I should be looking at deals more often. I need help. How do I do that? The entrepreneur that I started with 0 units is a lot different than the entrepreneur that we have over 1,500 multifamily units. And it's a journey for everybody. And I think, not that I ever had an ego, but maybe I craved that control. Maybe I was afraid to somebody would only do 60% of what I'm doing. And I figure if they could do 60%, that's great. I could do other stuff and I'm happy with 60% of what I can do. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I mean, here's the thing. Every choice you make has prizes and punishments. So if you choose to kind of control it all and keep it all on yourself and kind of dole out the occasional task to other people rather than invite them more into a development phase where they get to grow and learn and take on more accountability and responsibility, there are prizes and punishments to that. If you choose to be more coach-like, to trust other people, to give them more capacity, there's prizes and punishments to that as well. So let's just weigh up the choices. And then as a leader, whether you're leading a team or whether you're leading a bigger organization, you get to make the choice that's best for you. Here's the prizes and Jake.
I just have a comment on this because I think in my experience, sometimes it depends on the team member and their capacity for self-awareness and if they're high level enough for that autonomy. Because I'm very much not, I don't think so. I could have poor self-awareness. I don't think I'm much of a micromanager, but I do best when people are on my team that I'm able to coach in the way that you're describing it, because the last thing I'm ever going to be is the guy that needs to tell you everything to do, because I won't do that. It's just not in my nature. And then if you're not able to kind of work within that autonomy, it's not going to work. But I am able to come in and offer coaching during our weekly meetings and things. So I think for myself personally, this type of coaching, mentorship, management, if you will, suits me based on who I am as a human. It's just when the people need the hand holding or they have the interpersonal issues, it's typically not a fit. So there needs to be an alignment, I think, like anything, but that's been my experience in this, type of discussion. Yeah.
Okay. Let's put a few markers down because we're bandying some terms around and we haven't defined our terms yet. So first of all, let's say this. When we talk about moving to being more coach-like, we're not saying abandon all forms of advice giving or telling people what to do or being more directive. It's about a mix. It's like a mixing board in a music studio. Now, 20 years ago, Daniel Goleman, who's the father of emotional intelligence, or at least the guy who popularized this idea, wrote an article for Harvard Business Review where he said, look, there are 6 stars of leadership. They all have their moments. They all have their pros and cons. great leaders know how to use the right leadership style at the right time. Sometimes it's autocratic and saying, this is what we're doing. Sometimes it's democratic. Sometimes it's being more coach-like. What he found in his research is like most leaders use 2, maybe 3 of those styles at best, but great leaders use the right style at the right time. The first thing I'm really saying here is I'm not saying abandon everything you've ever learned about leading and only ask questions. That's annoying as hell for everybody and ineffective as a leader. There is a place for advice. And that leads me to how you define coaching, because coaching is one of those terms that gets bandied around a lot, but everyone's like, well, what do you mean exactly? Is it life coaching? Is it like sports coaching? Is it shouting at from the sides coaching? I mean, there's 1,000 different definitions of coaching. So here's mine, and it's very behavior-based. I think being more coach-like is this. Can you stay curious a little bit longer? Can you rush to action and advice giving a little bit more slowly? Because here's what I know to be true. Most of us are advice giving maniacs. We love it. We love to give advice. So my bet, because when you stick up your hand like that, Jake, I'm going, okay, so when Jake goes, I'm pretty good at coaching, what I think that might mean is I'm pretty good at jumping in and offering up some well thought through advice because I love giving advice and I'm trying to be helpful. And there's a place for your advice, but there's a price that you and others pay if your first move and your default move and your habitual move is to be the advice giver.
But we got to get to the point, man.
I'm
picking on myself just in case people don't know.
I hear you. Exactly. I know what you're saying, which is like, okay, I'm seeing it, which is like, I've got this urgency. I'm a bit of a go-getter. I want to make stuff happen. But, there's a difference between haste and speed. And here's the price you pay when you're like, okay, look, my job is to try and be the guy who's trying to be helpful by giving them the ideas, the solution, the opinion, the thought.
I am getting roasted today, huh?
Well, here's the thing. I'm kind of looking at you, but actually everybody who's listening to this is nodding their head going, this is kind of me as well, because this is true of most people, which is we've been taught that the way to be a leader, the way to add value is to be the person who's offering solutions. And I'm wanting to reposition how people think of themselves as be the person who's brilliant at figuring out what the problem is, not the person who's brilliant at coming up with the fast answers. Because if you can...
Michael, did my team set you up for this?
They did.
Okay, because this is an inside job. Okay, this is 100% an inside job because of the feedback that I've been getting.
Jake,
but I haven't acted
time out.
enough.
It's taking me months to get Michael on. Let me savor the next few minutes of this call and milk this bad boy as much as possible because everything he's saying is important. The quality of your life, as Tony Robbins says, depends upon the quality of the questions that you ask. And one other thing, Michael, you say answers are closed rooms and questions are doors that invite us in. And it's very hard to stay shut when you are a motivated person who wants to get things done. And what I love what you said is you need to have both, a blend of both. Some of us have only one style. Some of us ask questions till we're blue in the face and okay, get to the point. So I think you need to have a mix of both, correct?
Yeah, we got to let him finish his point on the get to the point, though, because we both cut him off there. So apologize.
You totally need to have a blend of both. But let me just say why I think it's powerful to just stay curious a little bit longer. The first is, if you're being the person who is like, okay, I hear what you're saying, let me tell you what I think you should do, and your default is, let me give you the answer, you're being seduced into thinking that the first challenge that shows up is the real challenge. And actually, the first time they come to you with this is what I'm wrestling with, that's not the real challenge. That's just the starting point. And what the other thing that you're making the mistake is, and now I am absolutely talking to you directly, Jake, your advice just isn't as good as you think it is. I mean, it feels friggin' awesome. You're like, my advice is gold dust. They're pearls of wisdom. And I'm sure there are moments where your advice is spot on, but it's actually just not as good as you think it is. And what this means is half the time you're offering not very good advice to solve the wrong problem. And that is not a strong leadership stance. But the real price goes further than that. The real price is this. You're training your people to be helpless. You're training your people to say, you aren't smart enough to figure this out. You're not actually as smart as I am. You're not as wise as I am. You're not as clever as I am. You're not as experienced as I am. I'm actually the smartest person in the room. So you should come to me to solve your problems. And that is excellent for maintaining your status and stroking your ego and making you feel good about it and making you feel like you're helping and offering value and all of that good stuff. but it means that you are absolutely not unlocking the potential of the people that you're working with. You're not allowing them to step up. It means that if you're the smartest person in the room, as the saying goes, you got to get into a better room. Because why would you hire people who are B or C players to make your organization thrive? You want to hire people who are better than you. This is a Steve Jobs quote. Hire people who are better than you and then get the hell out of their way. And if you've set yourself up as I'm the person you come to for advice, then you're saying to them, I'm your bottleneck. I'm the person who's wise here. Don't trust yourself. Don't trust your own sense. Come to me. And what that means is your organization's growth is limited by your own capacity. Whereas if you can be more coach-like, if you can ask good questions, here's what happens. And you'll have seen this, because I know you don't just give advice, you ask questions as well. When you ask a good question, you see people's eyes kind of drift up and to the left, and that's them trying to figure out the answer. And this is a fantastic moment, because this is them forming new neural pathways in their brain. This is them literally getting smarter in front of you. And if you're saying to yourself, look, my job is to grow the capacity and the confidence and the self-sufficiency and the autonomy of the people on my team, that means they can go further and faster and smarter without you, which means that you just have a better ability to have more impact in your team or in your organization, whatever you're doing. Now, you're not abandoning them. You're not saying, I'm never going to give you another piece of advice again, because that would be stupid. And it's almost impossible not to come in with some advice. You're just saying this: can I stay curious a little bit longer? Can I rush to action and advice giving a little bit more slowly? So the challenge for you, Jake, and Gino, and everybody listening in is, look, get into a conversation with your team. See if you can make it to 3 minutes without giving advice. That's it, 3 minutes. And after 3 minutes, you got permission to give as much advice as you want. But if you can just slow the rush down, everything changes in terms of how you lead and the confidence and the competence that people feel around you.
I love that. For everybody out there, the questions we want to ask are empowering questions, which are thought-provoking, open-ended questions. I mean, I'm a life coach, and I think that's one of the skills that I really had to learn, because I would always ask yes and no questions. Ask those open-ended, thought-provoking, empowering questions. Michael, what mistakes do people make when asking questions? Can you just, I guess that's one of them. They're open. They're asking close-ended questions. What else what other mistakes do we make?
Well, a few things. Sometimes people try and put too much of a kind of build up to the question. And I always go, look, James Bond movies. You go sit down in a James Bond movie and it starts, and immediately James Bond is doing something. He's jumping off a damn wall, or he's beating the hell out of somebody. I mean, you're just in it right away. But most people let me give you the build up, let me give you the context, let me give you the situation, let me give you the questions I were going to ask you, and now I'll finally get to the question, where I'm like, look, get a few good questions, and the Coaching Habit book has 7 of them, and just ask the question. Then the secret is this: don't ask another question until they start answering the first question. So sometimes we do a drive-by shooting kind of question, which is like, here's one question, here's another question, here's a third question, and here's a 4th and 5th and 6th question. And that kind of leaves the other person feeling overwhelmed. So ask the question, one question, then shut up and listen to the answer. And that's what the other mistake people make, is they don't then listen to the answer. They get so excited that they've actually got the other person talking. They're like, this is brilliant. But then they panic. They're like, oh my God, I'm not talking, they're talking. What's the next question? So they stop listening. They're just like, I'm just trying to come up with another question. And then when they think of another question, they're like, okay, I don't know what you were talking about because I wasn't really listening, but here's my next question for you. So here's the difficult, because you've learned different things, but it's like, ask one question, shut up, listen to the answer, be curious, like radiate a curiosity. And then this is a kind of bonus tip. Know that almost always their first answer is never their only answer, and it's rarely their best answer. So then ask, and what else? It's just like, it's just maintaining the space for them to answer the question. And if you want to hear this in action, like probably 6 months ago now, I coached Brene Brown on her podcast. So she interviewed me, and 40 minutes into the podcast, she was like, okay, Michael, well, show me how this works. Coach me. And I was like, oh, okay, don't screw this up, Michael, because 8 billion people listen to this podcast. But you'll hear me asking a question and then shutting up and listening, and you'll hear the power of silence, and you'll hear me asking, and what else? So you'll see me role modeling just a way of being curious with just a very few number of questions.
Let me go through these 7 questions. I want everyone to write these down because these are really important. Number 1 is kickstart.
Yeah.
What's on your mind? Number 2 is awe. Number 3 is focus.
Well, I mean, or is it stands for and what else?
Yep.
Which is the question I was just talking about, which is, I think, the best coaching question in the world, because you can just slip it into you can start using and what else right now. And let me also say this, because I know lots of people here, they're not just leading teams, they're talking to customers and potential customers. And all of this applies to them as well, which is like, stop being in such a hurry to sell stuff and make the deal and give them the advice. Stay curious longer, because it means that when you do offer advice or insights, you're more likely to be solving the real problem for them as well. But yeah, AWE and what else? So literally an awesome question.
For all you parents out there, this is for parents as well. This is an excellent way to connect with your kids. Don't be lazy. Listen to your kids. Don't do subjective listening, which is what most of us do. We got the TV on. We're not paying attention. What we want to do is get the objective listening where you're really listening to them. But also the third part, which is the highest part, is the intuitive listening, where you're really locked into the person. That's why you're asking these questions and you're listening. And don't worry what your next question is. Focus in on what they're saying and you can pivot. So we've got kickstart. Awe is number 2, and what else? And the third one is focus. What's the real challenge here for you? That's the third one. You want to jump into that real quick?
Sure. It comes back to what we were saying a bit earlier before, which is like, you can spend way too much time solving the wrong problem because you get seduced into thinking the first challenge is the real challenge, and it's not. So what's the real challenge here for you? I mean, let me give you a script. There's people can use, and I use this all the time. I'll go, okay, Jake, I hear you going on about the thing. What's the real challenge here for you in this? And the 2 magic bits to that question is, what's the real challenge that makes it better than what's the challenge? Because what's the real challenge is, look, I know there's more than one thing going on here. Out of all of it, what's the real challenge? And then I go, but what's the real challenge here for you? I mean, what's hard about this for you? Because I don't want an executive summary of the difficulty of the situation. I want to go, what are you wrestling with? So I go, what's the real challenge here for you, Jake? And Jake will say something and I'll nod my head and be interested. And then I'll go, great, what else? What else is a challenge here for you? And then I'll go, okay, what else? What else is the challenge here for you? Jake's like, oh my God, I didn't even know I had all these challenges, but this is helpful because I'm untangling what was the mess that was in my head. And then I'll lean in and I'll go, okay, so there's a bunch of stuff going on here for you. What's the real challenge in all of this for you? So just 2 questions. What's the real challenge here for you? And what else? And what else? So what's the real challenge here for you? And in 1, 2, 3 minutes, I've shifted the conversation to get much closer to the real issue. So now if I'm going to offer up ideas or opinions or advice, I know at least I'm getting close to what the real thing is that needs to be solved.
Gino, I want to go back to that for a second. I'm being curious. Okay. I'm being curious. I feel like we're rushing too much. So I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. The first part that I'd like to understand is, why do people not just tell you what the problem is? Because it sounds like a lot of what you've said is that someone will come to you with something, but ultimately it's like a shell game. It's really over here, but they're telling you one thing. Okay.
Gino, what would your guess be?
So for me,
there he goes with a question again.
So for me, it's vulnerability. It's they don't want to really open up to you because they're not sure that you'll like what they're saying. So it's like, well, is Jake really listening to me? Does Jake really want to know, or is he just wanting me to get an answer out there?
I don't want to know because I shut you down.
And number 2, they don't really know because they've never really thought about it. No one's really asked them the question because they're like, dude, I'm all alone here. I can't talk to this person. Jake is shutting me down. He's telling me to get 10x on my performance, but does he really care about me? So people don't know like you unless they know how much you care about them. That's I think the important thing. So Michael, proceed. I'm sorry.
I'd give the same answer, but probably just in reverse order. I think primarily is people just haven't actually had the space to think it through. Mm-hmm. And this stuff kind of just piles up in your head as a bit of
they're like feeling something, but they're not thinking about it. Is that fair? Is that what you're saying?
I just speak to what happens to me when I'm wrestling with something that I'm finding difficult. I've got a bunch of different things going on in my head and I can't quite articulate them all. And just having somebody ask the question and then hold the space for me to say some stuff out loud I figure it out by saying it out loud. And when I go, so what's the real challenge here for you? I'm like, well, here's the first thing that comes to mind. And then I kind of take that little block out of my muddled brain and I get it out of my brain. And then when you go, so, and what else? What else? And I'm like, oh, I'm seeing something else that's hard about this for me. And then I say it and I clarify it and I take it out of my brain and my brain's getting a bit more spacious. And then they go, well, what else is hard about this? And I'm like, oh, I can see a couple of other things now. And it's actually, you are creating a tiny bit of space for people to do some thinking. And we are so busy in our lives and we're so driven by the doing of it all that it's really hard to find space to think. And one of the gifts you give your people by staying curious is you invite them to think. You invite them to go, look, you don't have to get it done. I'm just creating space for you to figure this stuff out because it's hard.
Michael, this is a first on the Jake and Gino show. Usually Jake is the snowplower and I'm the one who likes to take my time, but it seems
he shut me down quick, man. He's got me on my heels. I got to back up, man.
This is very interesting. I mean, what it is it's really tiring everybody out there to do what Michael is suggesting, because I've got 6 children. And when I really have to start down, that's why people don't do this. But it's such a great investment in your time because it's short-term pain for long-term gain. At least that's the way I'm seeing it, Michael.
You know, the pain comes from unlearning ways of being and doing, because we have all been well trained for many years to have a default response to, here's why I want to give advice. And look, if people want to kind of do supplementary reading, if you like, around this, I did a TEDx talk 4 years ago or 3 years ago called How to Tame Your Advice Monster, which kind of is a dive into why actually we keep giving advice, even when we know intellectually that we should probably stay curious a little bit longer. So if you want to kind of go off down and watch a TEDx talk, just Google my name and How to Tame Your Advice Monster. But fundamentally, what's hard about being more coach-like, which is, by the way, the language I use, because I don't say be a coach, because lots of people don't want to be a coach. They want to be a real estate salesperson or a marketing person or an ops, or whatever. But being more coach-like is not a profession, it's a leadership behavior. If you want to be more coach-like, the easiest thing is just learning the 7 questions. I mean, we're going through them right now. You can write them down. You can just Google them because they're all over Google. You can just find the 7 questions. That's easy. What's hard is shifting your behavior. And, you know, the book is called The Coaching Habit. And the first chapter is about, here's how you build a habit. And it, you know, came out before James Clear's stuff, but you know, it draws on the same stuff that James's stuff draws on in terms of a habit formula and Charles Duhigg's work around trigger and behavior and reward and all of that sort of stuff. So it's like, how do you build a new habit? But really, it's a shift in identity to say, I add value, not by having the answer, or not by saving everybody from themselves, or not by staying in control of everything. I'm shifting my behavior to give up some control, give up some power, be willing not to know the answer, being willing to say, is the most valuable thing for me to do to share my answer or to help grow the capacity of this person so they figure this stuff out? You're shifting your standards in some stages, which is like, you know what? It is better that they figure out this problem and come up with their own solution and try it themselves. And it may not be quite as good a solution as the one that I think I've got, but you know what that gives them in terms of wisdom and empowerment and encouragement is the longer term investment that will make them a far more valuable member of my team. And quite frankly, half the time their answers are better than yours.
Well, even if they're not, most of the times, if they're close, you're going to get there in just about the same amount of time, right? There may be a little bit different path.
Exactly.
And is it worth fighting or even offering something else if it takes them an extra hour to get there with their solution, because that empowerment that you gave them? So even though I'm guilty of everything that you've said up to this point, many times I'll have a team member that offers a solution that I don't love as much as what mine would be, but I just go with it versus even having the conversation of not doing it, because they're going to get there. They're going to end up in the same place, right? It just may be a bit different of a path. So I think that's something that we can all do well.
Don't miss the learning that offers. So you're like, that sounds interesting. I'm curious to know how that's going to work out for you. So after you've done it this way, come back and we'll debrief. And then you go, what did you learn? And what did you notice? And what would you do differently next time? And let me tell you how I might have approached it. Where do you see the value in how my approach might have been? So it's really powerful to give people this opportunity. But what you are as a manager and as a leader at your best is you are a teacher. You help people learn. And that needs to be actively managed, not just passively hoped for. So make sure you help them learn. It's like when we get to the end of this podcast, I'm going to ask everybody, what was most useful or most valuable for you about this podcast? It's the 7th question that Gino's going to get us to. It's like the learning question, because there's a ton of stuff coming at them through here, because I'm kind of monologuing and we're all chatting away and we're all fast talkers. So there's a ton of stuff coming to them. But I'm going to say at the end, look, we've been talking for an hour. What was most useful or most valuable here for you? And that's going to make them name something and go, it was this. It was hearing Michael giving Jake a hard time, or Gino going through the questions, or who knows what it might be, Michael going on about and what else. And that's going to cement the learning. What fires together wires together. That's the neuroscience of it. And we're helping people see the wisdom, embed the wisdom, and get smarter.
Love that. Number 4, we'll go real quick before we go to the short answers, because I really want to get them all in. Number 4 is the foundation. What do you want? Great question.
Yeah. The hardest of the questions to answer in my experience. And the question it's of all the questions, is the one that I personally ask least. But when I do ask it, particularly when I'm finding it hard to figure out what's going on in the conversation, when the conversation feels like it's drifting or going around in circles a bit, I'll often ask that question. So what do you want here? And that gets them to name something that's really important. And then I can go back to some of the other questions. Like, if that's what you want, what's the real challenge here for you?
Mm-hmm. I love that. Number 5, lazy. How can I help?
Yeah. And this question is in partly powerful because it tames your rescuer. It tames that part of you that says, my job is to jump in and fix it. Because here's what happens most of the time. Somebody starts talking, and even though you don't know them that well, and you're not entirely sure what they're working on, and you don't know the people involved, and you don't know the context really, after about 3 seconds, you're like, I know exactly what they need. So now you're
that's long. You're long into the game at that point.
Yeah, exactly. After 3 seconds, you're like, I'm slower than usual, but I'm pretty sure now that I know what they need. And now you're just doing the fake listening thing where you're like, I'm going to pretend to listen while you keep talking, but I'm just waiting for a gap so that I can tell you that my brilliant thing. And you're trying to tame your own advice monster. So, Jake comes to me and goes, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, so many ideas here. But rather than going, well, Jake, let me tell you what I think, you go, I can see there's a lot going on for you. What do you want from me, Jake? I mean, how can I help here? He's like, I just needed to get this off my chest. I don't need any help. And you're like, brilliant. See ya. We're done. It was like, I'm really trying to figure out what the hard thing is here. I'm like, let me ask you some questions. It's not as often as you think that people come going, just tell me the answer. They're really going, help me solve the problem, or just give me some space, or just help me feel seen or heard as to what's going on. So how can I help? Forces the other person to ask for what they're looking for and slows down your rush to jump in and give advice.
I love that. Number 6, strategic. If you're saying yes to this, what are you saying no to?
Yeah, I mean, the hardest thing in the world is to get really good at saying no to stuff. But strategy in the end is, can you say no to the stuff that you kind of want to do? And most organizations fail or flail, or they just don't succeed as powerfully as they might, because they don't have the discipline to say strong no's to stuff that they should be saying no to. And what's true at a strategic level in an organization is true at a personal level as well, which is like, you become more powerful, I think, if you're really clear what your yeses are, and know that if you're saying yes, it means nothing unless it comes with a no.
Mm-hmm. And the last one, before we go to the short answers, learning. What was most useful for you? You mentioned that, and that's a powerful question, isn't it?
Yeah. One thing that people can take away is what's most valuable for them from this call is the bookends for any good conversation. One is you start with what's on your mind. They're going to get you into the interesting conversation faster. And then you finish any conversation as well. Tell me what was most useful here for you. And that is just a way you can start and finish almost any conversation with your team, with your boss, with your customer, with your client, with your vendors. And it's going to make it stronger, more powerful conversations.
Let's take a quick time out to hear from our sponsors.
If you are looking to get involved in multifamily, this is where you need to be.
The team you've built is incredible.
There is no egos here. Everyone is always looking to help the other person.
All right, gang, we're back. So touching on Brene Brown a little bit, and the ladies on our team were just huge fans of her. And I just didn't feel like you bookended that enough. I want to hear more from the coaching there and what the end result was when you were you're going through that segment on the show.
Yeah, so I got to know Brene before she became an Uber superstar and became a Saint Brene. So she'd been on a couple of podcast things that I'd done, and we almost wrote a book together. I pitched her a book. I was like, let's write a book about this, and she's like, that's a really good idea. And then I suspect she went back to her publisher, who went, "You're Brene Brown. Why would you be writing a book with some other dude? Just write your own book." And to be fair, that worked out quite well for her. So. But her team called me up and invited me onto the podcast, which was really exciting. And here's what I mean. You'll get this from listening to it if you choose to do that. But she's kind of going, I'm feeling like I'm stretched thin. I'm feeling like there's too much going on here. I'm feeling like I'm trying to rethink my relationship with my team. So there's a bunch of stuff swirling on. What's most powerful, I think, is perhaps three things. First is, if you listen to it, you'll notice that all I do is I use, I think, 3 of the 7 questions that Gino has just listed. That's it. That's all you hear me ask. The second is, you'll notice the power of silence, because I'll ask a question, and for one of them, like Brene is quiet for, I don't know, when I was doing it live, it felt like about 8 minutes, but it turns out to be more like 10 seconds or something, but she's really thinking through the answer. And I've got the experience to go, look, shut up. Don't let your anxiety fill the silence, because that's what happens to most of us. We're like, oh my God, they've been silent for 2 seconds. It's all going wrong. Let me ask the question again, or let me kind of step into it. And like, you know what? Silence is magical. Silence is somebody trying to figure this stuff out. So, you get to celebrate that. You get to say, this is what coaching looks like when it's working. Quietness is there, like, oh my God, that's a good question. I don't have a fast answer. And then the third thing that I think is powerful is when I asked for like the 3rd or 4th time, I go, so what's the real challenge here for you, Brene? She's like, I just need some time away from this. Like, I've been going too long, too hard, too fast. I'm exhausted. I need that space. And it's interesting, this month, I think, or last month, she and the whole team have taken a bit of a sabbatical, like a month or 2 months off, just to kind of have a chance to reset. And it'd be audacious to take too much credit for that, but there is a connection between, I think, the coaching I had with Brene around that and the fact that that team is now taking time and space away. And she didn't start off by going, hey, Michael, my real challenge is I'm exhausted. She started off by going, here's the team dynamic that I'm trying to figure out. And where we got to by me just going, but what's the real challenge here for you? She's just bone tired around stuff.
That was authentic. It was not a role play then.
Oh no, I didn't even know she's going to ask me to coach. I was like,
that's so cool.
We didn't have any prep around it. She was like, just show up. And I was like, oh my God, what's she going to ask me about? Is it this book or that book or the other book? So I was kind of sweating it. I don't know, don't screw this up. And then when we, we're literally at 40 minutes in, she's like, okay, so why don't you coach me? And I'm like, okay, what's this about? I don't know. So yeah, it's all genuine, live in the moment, no scripting or anything. It's just me sweating.
That's awesome. I have a hunch, maybe off, but what is your thoughts on culture? And do you have any tips or best practices that you've used in your organization to improve culture? I maybe not your thing, but I just have a hunch there may be something there.
No, I know a bunch about culture. Where would I start with that? So the model I think I use when I think about your culture is there are 3 levels to it. And this comes from a guy called Edgar Schein, Schein. And, think of it as a triangle. So at the top level, the most obvious level is the artifacts of your culture. It's when you walk into the building, if you have a building, or when you kind of connecting, it's the stuff that you can see, everything from what people wear, to what their titles are, to what the office looks like, to what the org chart looks like, to, it's the stuff. That's most obvious. It's a little tricky because we quickly leap to interpret what it means. And we don't always understand what all those symbols mean, but it's placed symbols. It's what you see.
Michael, excuse me, would that also be social media as far as logos, as far as what you see behind me? Is that what you're talking about?
So as I look at the two of you and I go, you're part of a culture, I'm making conclusions about what this is and what it means. The second level down is espoused values. And what that is, just big words for this is what we talk about is important. So it can be everything from what the leader talks about as our core values. It can be the stuff that you see posted on the walls and laminated signs that here are our values. It's what shows up and gets talked about and repeated when there's an all hands meeting or whatever. So it's the stuff that we talk about is important. And then the third level is the stuff that we do, particularly the stuff that we do when we're not really thinking about what we do. It's the kind of habitual patterns of behavior. If you have all 3 of those aligned, you have a strong culture. It's what you see, is what we talk about, is what we do. More typically in a culture, you don't have an aligned culture because people put a lot of effort into the first 2 levels. Hey, we're a cool organization. So we've got purple bean bags everywhere. And everybody can wear chicken suits to the office because we're cool like that. And there's a milkshake contain, whatever place to have milkshakes in our thing because we're that cool. We are cool. And the espoused value is like, we're hip, we're fast, we're young, we're dangerous, we break things, blah, blah, blah. And our people come first as a classic. People first. But then the patterns of behavior are like, how do we screw our clients? How do we make money? How do we make profit first? How do we make sure our leaders feel like they're more important than our people? And there's a way that often the behaviors of an organization are out of sync, out of this espoused values and the artifacts around it. How do I change the culture around here? How do I shift the way that we want to be as an organization? And it's hard because, first of all, you're not fine-tuning an engine, you're dealing with a living entity. And whenever you push into a culture to try and make it different, it will push back. This homeostasis is the language for it, and it just means we try and keep things the way they are. So the point of a system, which is what a culture is to maintain itself. So anytime you try and shift a culture, the thing goes, oh, I'm tricky, and I'm going to try and push back because I don't want to change. It's just a characteristic of a system. So there are 2 ways that cultures change, and you need both of them. The first way culture changes through individual behaviors. How do we all individually act differently so that we are acting in alignment with a way that is true and to the best version of this culture? So you have to understand about individual behavior change and how to influence that. But you also have to understand that individual behavior change is influenced by structural changes in an organization, the environment, the way people are paid, the way leadership happens. So you have to also play with organizational change as well. And there's this kind of conversation back and forth between change at an organizational level and change at an individual level is how cultures evolve.
A very complete answer. I appreciate your perspective there.
No worries. It's a little academic and abstract, so apologies if it was a bit too high level.
No, I loved it. You mentioned habits before. Any habits that you do on a daily or weekly basis that have added value to your life?
The habit that is, I'm not that great at habits. I go hard for a little while and then I somehow get distracted. And then before I know it, it's been 3 months before I've done the thing. And I'm like, damn it, that was actually a good habit. But the thing that I'm sticking with at the moment that is being helpful is comes from my friend Neil Pazrika. And it kind of Neil Pazrika meets bullet journal. So I ask myself 3 questions at the start of the day. I go, what am I noticing? And that's just kind of a checking in on myself, which is like, am I happy? Am I sad? Am I anxious? Am I worried? What's kind of top of mind for me? Neil's version of that question is, what can I let go of? But I realized I didn't want to let go of most of the stuff that I was noticing. I just wanted to notice it. So I'm like, I don't want to let go of being frustrated. I actually want to sit with it and go, what is that? Why am I frustrated? And why am I anxious? Or why am I avoiding the conflict or whatever it might be? The second question is, what am I grateful for? So, this morning I went to a physio to help fix a dodgy knee that I've got. So as I was on the way back from that, I was doing my 3 questions, and I'm like, I'm grateful for my physio, Nate. He hurt me quite a lot, but I'm feeling like my knee's getting better. So it can be just a really tangible thing in the moment. And then the third question is, what's the one thing? Like, what's the one thing I need to get done today that would make me, win the day, as the saying now goes. So for me today, that's write 500 words of my next book. Like, my next book is due in exactly 1 month from today, first draft. I'm well behind. And I'm like, I need to write a minimum of 500 words today. And hopefully I'll write more, but 500 words is the minimum. So that's what I've named. And even though I've got 2 podcasts to do, like this is one of them, and I've got a big client engagement where I'm performing and running a webinar. Of all the things that are going on, the writing is the one thing that I want to make sure is most important for me.
Oh, and this stuff just happens. You do the podcast, it's happening. When you actually have to sit down and creative, that's the bitch, man.
Yeah,
good luck
exactly.
with that today.
It's like, I'm finding it really hard to write this next book, but that's part of the process of writing a book. I always forget that I always find it really hard to write a book. And so it's the discipline of a little bit every day that gets the thing across the line.
Speaking of books, anything that you've read in the last year or so that you want to recommend to the folks?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, let me pick one that I've just read recently that I thought was good. I'm not sure I'd call it great, but I'd call it good. And this is by a psychotherapist called Terrence Real, or Terry Real as he shows up. And it's called Us, Getting Past You and Me to Build a More Loving Relationship. And he does work in the corporate world. So this isn't just about personal or interpersonal relationships. This is, I think, also how do you react with the people with whom you work all the time. And for me, the key and this is kind of what my new book is about, very loosely. It's about working relationships. So I'm trying to do background reading around that. And for me, the power here is him going, look, this sense of individuality, he calls it toxic individualism, and how that we all thrive when we all connect. And that to me is the big, powerful message, because there's a connection to, this conversation we had around giving advice versus being willing to give up power and ask questions, which actually is a more relationship-based way of leading and connecting. It's like you have to give up some of your own ego and your need to be the star and be in the spotlight and to be right, to commit to a relationship that has a chance of growing. So I thought I'd probably give this like 7.5 stars out of 10. So solid.
Not bad. So here's a few takeaways for me today. I needed this bad, but Gino, your brother Marco needs it even worse than I do. So we got to make sure he gets on this bandwagon here. Where can folks go to get the books? Is there a website? Because it's a great amount of resources here. I want to make sure people have access to these.
Thanks. The hub website is mbs.works. And if you go there, you'll see connections to the books, and there's a bunch of free stuff for every book, videos and kind of additional learning. So whatever book takes your fancy, you can just sign in and kind of get free access there. And there's other free courses and other bits and pieces at mbs.works.
Wonderful. You're up. It's your time to shine. What you got?
MBS, a young, unhireable chap who decided to become a lawyer and stayed in school probably 2 years too long.
Indeed.
And then went to work for a couple of big companies like, I'm making shit, but where does this shit go? It goes to die. I don't want to do this. I'm soul sucking. And then he comes up with the idea of the coaching habit. And for me, having him on, it's been an honor because I love talking about this stuff, and I wish I could execute as much as I love it, because for me it's a struggle to do this because I want to be able to help people. I want to be able to provide the answers and the value, and sometimes it's just time to take a step back and let people figure crap out for themselves, but that's really hard to do. Go through those 7 questions, go on Michael's website, buy the book, once again, The Coaching Habit, invest $15. Don't drink Starbucks for 2 days. Go buy the book, and this will change your life. It will revolutionize the way you look at things. Become a better listener. Become better at asking questions. Become better at being curious. And I'll leave you with this, Jake and Michael. Answers are closed rooms. Questions are doors that invite us in, my friend.
Here's my commitment to you, Michael. You're my Gandalf today. You're my knowledge center. You're the wisdom. I'm gonna put hold at the top of a sheet of paper. I'm gonna put it right here because when you were saying that, what do you do? I was thinking Braveheart in the scene where they're like hold right, and they're all get. I'm gonna shut the F up. I'm gonna hold, and I'm gonna put the 7 questions down, and I'm gonna kick my feet up and sip a latte. That's what I'm doing from now on in my coaching calls.
And dude, they're gonna be like, Jake, what's wrong with you, Jake? Why are you so quiet? Why are you asking? I mean, you're making me uncomfortable now, Jake. What's going on?
That is actually what's going to happen. Because, and the temptation is they will pull you back in. It's like Godfather, right? Just when I thought I got out, they pull you back in. So one of the ways to do that is just name it. You're like, you know what? I'm actually going to try and be curious longer in these conversations with you today. So you're going to notice me asking more questions and giving less advice, just so you've got a heads up around that. So you don't weird them out. Because actually what will happen most of the time is they'll go, oh my God, Jake's just been on another podcast with some random person. And he's now experimenting on me. Luckily, Jake's got the memory of a goldfish, so he'll forget this in a week, and we'll just be back to doing.
That's why the paper's going on the desk.
Exactly. So just tell your people what you're doing. Teach them. Get them on your side. You're not trying to trick them. You're trying to create a better working relationship with them, or maybe you're trying to trick them. Okay,
I'm just messing with you. My final statement, Michael, you are the man. Really enjoyed this today. Thank you so much for your time. Wealth and knowledge.
My pleasure. Lovely to talk to you both. Thanks.